random little things, covered. Hey, and thank you to those who have submitted their assignment, and most of you have, and you've done a really good job there. I was quite intrigued by some of your analysis. I think generally we had a really good group in identifying sort of risks and did pretty well at categorizing those under these exposure, likelihood, or severity, but a little bit more work to be done on some of that. But that's okay. That's why we started out with that one, and we'll move on to some more of that in this module and when you do your actual safe system assessment. But what I did want to do is maybe just work through one of the intersections, somebody's intersection, if they'd like to sort of have a chat about it. So if you're interested in having your intersection looked at and discussed, we can talk about it together. We will unmute you and you can talk about a few features and the like. Just put your hand up or just type your intersection into the chat, and I'll find it and bring it up on Street View, and then we can have a chat about it. So anybody brave enough to pop their intersection in or pop their hand up, we can have a little bit of a chat about it.
You might get a prize if you do.
Right.
Oh, no. Oh, yep. Good one. We've got one. Mark. Unless he's done it accidentally.
Look at that. Okay, Mark, can you hear us? You're on mute at the moment, so you're going to have to unmute yourself. We can't quite do that for you.
Yep, I can hear.
We can hear you too. Excellent. Now, Mark, remind me, which intersection did you have?
That was Springston Rolleston Road, Selwyn Road intersection, just out of Rolleston and Canterbury.
Okay, so sorry, what was the
Springston, Rolleston and Selwyn Road.
Okay, sorry. Say it again. Spell it out for me.
Springston, then Rolleston, Rolleston Road.
Okay, let me bring that up. Kathy, maybe, yeah, okay, got it. Kathy, maybe if you can just show people that, oh, actually, no, I'm on. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I'll share.
Yeah, so it's, let me just share my screen here. Screen 2, hopefully is that the one?
That's the one.
Good, awesome. All right, let's have a look. What do we got over here? Is that a little?
That's a sewer pump station there. So.
Yeah, okay. That's right. Yep. No, this is good. Okay, let's have a look here now. Mark, tell me what sort of things do you think were influencing the exposure to crashes at this intersection?
Well, there's a couple of things. In Rolleston, there's been a lot of growth over the last few years and things like that. So while this is Street View from 2019, I think, a lot of the vegetation on the fence lines and things like that is changing. So the township is actually spreading right down to this intersection of Selwyn Road. So Rolleston is to the north, so it's behind where we're looking at the moment, and the development's all heading down towards Selwyn Road. So there's just, this intersection was actually, the curve was eased. It was a 35 advisory speed curve previously, so it actually got reconstructed about 9 or 10 years ago. And thinking that it was still going to be rural, it's going to be a link on the fringes of Rolleston. Rolleston, unfortunately, is heading out towards this intersection here. So while it's a rural intersection at the moment, you see the development on the right there, that is actually extending all the way down. So it's going to change traffic behaviour. So the New Southern Motorway, which is State Highway 1, which starts at Rolleston and opened up, the idea was that traffic from Rolleston to get into Christchurch would go and use that. But a lot of people down the southern end of the new development choose Selwyn Road to go to Christchurch, and they're going across this intersection on the bend. So, yeah. So the Southern Motorway from Rolleston, you can see the Southern Motorway started by 76. Now that's there. That links into Christchurch. So that's just new, only opened fairly recently. But people down the southern end of Farringdon subdivision, if you have a look on the zoom in on Rolleston a bit more, they choose to go straight up Selwyn Road onto Shands Road, which is an arterial road to get into Christchurch with the intersections and things along there. So it's caused, there's been a recent crash history on Selwyn Road. So Selwyn Road, the traffic volume on both roads now is about 5,000 vehicles a day. Selwyn Road 10 years ago would have been under 1,000 vehicles a day. So it's been a big change. So people still choose to go that way because they think it's a quicker route, shorter route, but then have issues at the intersection of people turning, traffic going through, some not stopping at the stop sign and things like that. So that's what's changing. And so there's going to be a roundabout at the intersection as a result of that, just with the change, which the developers are designing at the moment for us, and they'll be paying for it as well. So all that land that we're looking at, all those trees, that willows and things like that, they're all gone. The landscaping on the corner that's still there, but all those hedges are gone, and it's all going to be urban all the way down to this intersection.
Right.
So not many driveways coming onto Springston Rolleston Road. It's only going to be the side roads, and all the access to the new sections are within the internal subdivision roads.
Right, right. Okay. What's the speed limit?
Currently 80.
So exposure's being driven by the volume, obviously. The volume using this as a sort of I almost wanted to say rat run, but it's not really a rat run. But
no, it's like a collector road now. So.
Yeah. So the growth in the area, generating that volume, and the motorway opening up. So so we've got this volume increasing. So exposure to crashes is increasing. So if we do, what are the factors that might influence the likelihood of crashes? Any thoughts on that, Mark?
Well, yeah, the likelihood is that it's a stop controlled intersection, so people making choices and having to judge gaps and that sort of thing. And with the speed there, currently Springston Rolleston's 80 around the bend there. So the likelihood is just the volume of traffic and quite even flows, and so there aren't that many gaps at the peak times. So people are going through all that, and Springston Rolleston Road is linked between Rolleston and Lincoln. So Lincoln University, so two towns that's linked through. That used to be sort of the main route. That's why it's of a higher standard. But people are still doing that. So they're turning left and right off Selwyn Road as well to get onto Springston Rolleston Road, and the gap there. Yeah, speed of traffic on Springston Rolleston Road coming along. So the ones at the stop have to make that choice and try and get them to slow down. Is a good idea. So those manoeuvres at that intersection.
Yeah.
The pump station doesn't seem to affect it too much. That's in the old alignment of the road that was there before the curve was reconstructed. So that was sort of surface road reserve that's been used for a sewer pump station as well. So, which pumps all the sewer to our treatment plant at Rolleston. So that doesn't really affect any traffic at all.
So did it used to be like a Y intersection? And it was no?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it was still the crossroad, but it was we had some crashes, people not just going around the bend. So I think it was a 35 advisory speed on that curve before. So that's why I got eased to what it is.
Yeah. What about the severity of crashes? What's influencing that?
Yeah, the speed of traffic on Springston Rolleston Road is much anything else, but most of them are people getting hit side on. So it's 90-degree crashes most of the time. And so there's been a variety. It's people coming out of the stop, making a misjudgment, so stopping and then going when they shouldn't. Some missing the intersection as well, but it's mainly people making a poor judgment in terms of when to go and when not to go. And if traffic on each side is turning, who makes the call on turning? And some crashes have also been people a bit unsure when they're turning off Springston Rolleston Road, aren't quite indicated early enough, and people aren't anticipating what they're doing. And so there's been a couple of crashes associated with that as well, sort of rear ends as well.
Right.
So
okay. So that's actually, there you go.
Yes, that's what it used to be.
Yeah. So what a good, I mean, this is your classic visual deceit, see-through effect. People overshooting the intersection because it all lines up straight, and then a treatment to reduce the likelihood of that being the offset T. So you just offset it, staggered T, and so you don't get that see-through effect. So that's no doubt helped in reducing the likelihood of crashes, but there's still crashes happening, and they're still highly, severe. And there's also an addition of some challenges associated with that little kink in the turning and how, who goes where and the like.
Yeah, all of that. People get a bit confused, and just because there's more traffic now, say 5,000 vehicles a day on both roads, at the peak times there's actually a lot of flow in both directions, so people have to make a judgment call. So.
Yeah, so this is a really good example site. So thank you, Mark, for bringing it up. And I suppose there's a number of things I just want to have a little chat about associated with this one. One being that I think this example, which we've sort of just lucked upon, I think, with the see-through effect versus staggering it, is a pretty good example of where a safe system assessment would, I suppose, help you quantify that. The staggered T, which when did that happen, do you think? In fact, I can tell you exactly. It was in May 2012. It was being built. So we sort of got 10 years out of that, but it's back now to a point where we're really looking to upgrade it because of the risk and the trauma. And what a safe system assessment back would have done is at least sort of given you that continued push at the severity aspects of it. Because the staggered T, while it helps the likelihood of crashes a bit in those see-through overshoot crashes, the severity is all being really driven by the vehicles coming through here at 80 kilometers per hour plus, potentially. Well, maybe slowed down a bit for the curve. So yeah, that's interesting. In just sort of analysing this under the sort of safe system assessment framework that we're going to be using more and more in detail, the exposure scores we're going to give this intersection are all just driven by the number of vehicles on each leg, the number of pedestrians, if there are any, which it doesn't look like there likely would be, pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists. That all drives our exposure score. Now, for the assignment that you all did, we sort of were a bit broader in sort of saying, well, what's influencing this exposure? But one thing that a number of people did, and I completely understand why, but I'll just have a chat to you about it, was talked about the things like the width of the intersection as an exposure factor. So, a wider intersection, meaning a pedestrian crossing or a vehicle crossing is exposed to crashes for a longer period of time. Now, I completely understand why people have said that, because that's been a very common use of the word exposure in road safety for many, many years. But in a safe system assessment, we've started to sort of categorize these things and say, well, we're going to quarantine exposure just to the number of vehicles, number of pedestrians, number of cyclists, number of motorcyclists. So the length of crossing or the like, we will put into the likelihood factor. So that was one. So exposure is going to be numbers. Then, as Mark beautifully pointed out, some of the likelihood factors are the fact that it's a passively controlled intersection. So it's, stop signs, they're there, they're big and they're bright, but that's only going to reduce the likelihood of crashes. Other things that are going to reduce the likelihood of crashes: lighting, surface conditions are reasonable. They might not be today, but their line marking's okay, but faded in some areas. The offset T is going to reduce the likelihood of crashes a bit. Things that are going to increase the likelihood of crashes, I'd say, are, well, the 80 kilometre speed limit, better than 100, but it's relatively high speed, so that's going to be a likelihood and a severity factor. We've got sightline issues, obviously. There we've got the we've got the curves on the approach, so that might influence the likelihood of crashes. We've got roadside objects, so likelihood of runoff road crashes. The frangibility or rigidness of the roadside objects is actually a severity factor. So the fact that they're there is the likelihood factor, and how close they are to the road is the likelihood factor. The severity is all about their strength and the impact that that's going to have on anybody leaving the road. The presence of the barrier is a severity factor. It'll reduce the severity of anybody leaving the road and going into the sewer pump station there. The speeds, the angles, exactly as Mark said, are the big severity factor for the intersection crashes. And yeah, so things like this light pole here, let's have an inspection of this light pole. Oh, a bit hard to see. It looks like an impact absorbing. I can't see a slip base on it, but it does look like an impact absorbing light pole. So that might, reduce the severity a bit. We've got sort of general shrubbery there, but we do have your power poles, which are obviously rigid. Somebody put a little delineator on it to try to do something. Maybe that's for the vehicle coming out this way to see something there. And another power pole there. So you're sort of seeing that you can take all these different elements of an intersection like this and just sort of categorize them into this exposure, likelihood, severity. Some of them are making you go, well, that increases risk. And some of them you're going, well, that decreases risk a bit for these reasons. And this is essentially what you're doing in a safe system assessment, but then you put some end scores on all of this. So I'm glad to hear a roundabout is being proposed here, and that's going to do a wonderful job in reducing predominantly the severity of crashes. There will be crashes that will continue to occur here, and I dare say it'll be some rear end, some light rear end crashes, and maybe a little bit of in the roundabout mistake sort of happening style crashes, but the severity will be so low with an appropriately designed roundabout.
Can you still hear me, Ken?
Yeah.
Yeah, just another issue. As we're looking straight across that intersection where the willow tree is behind the truck there, there's a secondary school proposed on that intersection there. So there will be in the future pedestrian and cycle activity associated with the school, particularly because there's going to be subdivision development all around that and across the road as well. So they'll be getting to and from that secondary school there. So it's the second one that's been built in Rolleston. So.
Right. So.
Sorry, there's also been a couple of questions exactly on that. How's the exposure going to be once the development is done, especially for pedestrian and cyclists?
Yeah, it's a great point. And so let's just have a look at this nice little bit of aerial imagery. We'll get those off there. So yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating one. You can see them madly moving dirt around up here for housing. I would expect.
There's houses already in there, yeah.
Oh yeah, they're already in, are they? Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're seeing. So what were you saying? The school's going to be here.
Yeah, in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to have people crossing there, and no doubt as this opens up. So interestingly, in a safe system assessment, what we tend to do is the existing conditions. We analyse that. We analyse the project that's going to be built, but we analyse it sort of day one of opening. If you want to do a future scenario, you can agree on some predicted traffic volumes, pedestrian volumes, cyclist volumes, and then you can do that so you'd essentially go, your assessment will be existing conditions, opening day of whatever you're building, like the roundabout, and then you could do a modelled scenario of like a 20-year projection or 10-year projection if you wanted. And say, what's it all going to look like that? And that may give you some insights. So when you're building that roundabout, now it might be worth considering adding some features for pedestrians to cross and cyclists at this early stage, rather than sort of waiting till the school's built, the subdivisions are all up and running and thriving, and then we've got parents and kids trying to cross the road near this roundabout, and we know it's probably going to be a bit of a challenge. Well, so thank you, Mark. That was a really good example, and I suppose help us see how we can sort of put into compartments these different elements.
I thought it might be a good one for the assignment at the end, but we've been assigned one in Christchurch. So I was just going to make a suggestion. This might be a better one for us, being a rural local authority or something like that. But I'll send something through, so that's all right.
So you've got designs for that roundabout?
Well, the consultants working on the subdivisions are working on that at the moment. Yeah.
Right.
And some of the power undergrounding is already happening as part of the frontage of the subdivision. They sort of haven't got consent yet, but they're working on the assumption that they're going to get it. So the developers are spending the money now, getting ready. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So for the assignment, we do need some sort of design, even be it like a concept level, or something like that. So send something through and have a chat with Kathy and Emma and/or Emma. We can. We're flexible on that. If there's something that's more valuable to analyse, happy for that to happen.
Yeah, it was one we're actually working on anyway, so I thought it might be a good one to have that assessment as part of that, so it can be used by us in the future. But there's a design being worked on. I just haven't really been involved in it. It's in a different area, but I'll grab the design that they've got, so that's fine.
Great.
I'll just mute myself now, so I'm not saying things I shouldn't be saying.
we will be able to sort of kick you out shortly. Not kick you out. Anybody can always come back by putting their hand up. But that's that's excellent. Thank you, Mark. There was one more question I think that came in on the chat.
Yeah, is the speed expected to remain at 80 kilometres an hour? So, Mark, you might have to jump back in there.
I've got a report going to council in a couple of weeks to reduce it down to 60 with what's going on, but it may end up being 50. It's being a totally urban area, but it's not an urban, the streets aren't going to have all the driveways coming onto it. Most of the access to the roads are going to be via the side roads. So it lends itself to 60, but it may be 50, and then it may be 50, and then all the local roads 40 after that, once we get our setting of speed limits all signed off in the future. So urban traffic areas in New Zealand, there's a push to going for 40 generally, and then the collector roads within the townships, staying at 50, but all the local roads being 40. So that's sort of something in the next 2, 3, 4 years that we've still got a lot of discussion about. But at least reducing this to 60 at the moment, and then looking at reducing it further after that.
All right. Interesting little case there.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah.
The growth in Roslyn's happened much quicker than anticipated, because that was only in 2012 that intersection was done and a couple of others, and getting people from Rolleston into Christchurch and on those roads, improving them, but they're actually not rural anymore. They're actually becoming more urban fringe and urban a lot quicker than anyone anticipated, just because of the growth after the earthquakes, that sort of thing. People are coming out to Rolleston, so it just keeps on growing.
I suppose the other interesting thing is that for those in the training here that have never seen that intersection in their life, and we just had a little explore around it. I don't think it sort of surprises anybody that there's been crashes there, and that the severity, the 80k speed limits influencing the severity, and some of those things that we're talking about. So the challenge we've got, I suppose, is the number of these types of intersections out there on the New Zealand road network. There's a huge amount of them. Yeah. This one's of particular interest due to the growth around it, but we're sort of sitting on this high energy areas with risk across the network.
Yeah, we've got them within our district as well, other ones, but not necessarily with growth, but just because of where they are and how to try and deal with them, and you can only do so much at a time. So it's just sort of doing the best thing that we can at the time, and filling what we can. And like that roundabout there, the pump station is not going anywhere, so have to be working with the land we've got and that sort of thing, which like the compact one that was shown last week, it sort of lends itself to something like that, because there's a lot of turning and manoeuvres around there, and there's still heavy vehicles on there, that sort of thing. So it sort of lends itself to that a wee bit anyway. So.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what the developers come up with in terms of their design.
Well, initially, they came up with a big roundabout, which we didn't really want there. So.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you, Mark. That's
you're welcome.
That's great. And we'll just drop you away. I'm going to cover off a few slides now, and then we have a few little exercises within this. But that was a good little example. I will just delve back in a little bit into the exposure, likelihood, and severity discussion, just because there's a couple of tricky bits, and it's important to get this clear in your mind, because it's really fundamental to doing a safe system assessment to categorize things into exposure, likelihood, and severity correctly. And that's really one of the key things that we need to get across in this training, is that you're able to do that. Generally, I found that most people were pretty good in their assignments on likelihood and severity. Actually, severity in this group was actually probably the best. Most people were very clear. Severity is sort of speed, angle, heavy vehicle presence. Likelihood, most people were pretty good, understanding it's all those things like traffic signals or signage, line marking, surface conditions, sight lines, all of that sort of stuff. And exposure probably was the one that let a few people down. So the reason we're so obsessed with this in this course is that in this safe system definition of risk, sort of this safe system assessment definition of risk, it's that exposure, likelihood, and severity, which, as I mentioned last time, is a little bit weird that you separate exposure out as its own entity. Usually it would be sort of those two making up the likelihood of crash. But exposure, likelihood, and severity. And I think when you start doing assessments, which we're getting to very shortly, you'll see why that was extracted out as its own entity. But it does then make a challenge for us to categorize things. But the exposure is all about the number of people exposed to that crash time, be that pedestrian, cyclists, motorcyclists, cars, or the like. So really the only way to impact your exposure is to make people not exposed to it. Now, some people got this, really, really well, and they talked about things like closing off the intersection, closing off legs to the intersection, complete grade separation, so overpasses, flyovers. This one here that we showed the other module, closing off this level crossing, making them go around to another intersection. Now that they are exposed to crashes at that other intersection, but within a general envelope of this area, you're sort of saying that that's removed exposure. Now, separated facilities becomes this really interesting one, because here it's pretty clear. They're not exposed to crashes with passenger vehicles. So the cyclists are not exposed to crashes with passenger vehicles because they're on their own dedicated facility. But it becomes a little more challenging when you're sort of separating by a little bit of curbing, or you separate by, a bit of nature strip, or the like. Is that changing the exposure to crashes, or is it changing the likelihood of crashes? And that becomes a little bit of a tricky one. So we've actually created a fact sheet on that topic to help people in their safe system assessments make sure they categorize those. And I'll show you those shortly. There are some definitions which I haven't given to you yet, but these come in the safe system assessment framework, and exposure is probably one which is worth looking at. This refers to which road users and in what numbers and for how long they're using the road, and thus exposed to potential crashes. The measure of exposures, AADT, side road traffic volumes, number of motorcyclists, cyclists, and pedestrians. So it's all about the numbers. And if you just keep that clear in your mind when you're doing your exposure scores, you should be okay. So doing lots of safe system assessments, and then trying to get everybody that we're teaching to do safe system assessments in on the same page and doing a consistent assessment, we discovered a few areas that were particularly challenging for people to categorize. And so we've started to just create a series of fact sheets on these different things. This one in here is on the separation of bike lanes from traffic lanes, and when you would categorize that in a likelihood reduction, and when it would be an exposure reduction, and when it might be a severity reduction. So an on-road bike lane, you might say, well, they're separated, so they're not exposed to crashes. Well, we say they are because people are going to leave their lane and there's really nothing there to, to stop them entering the bike lane. A small curb, we actually still say is a likelihood factor because we know vehicles mount curbs quite easily and they may do that, but the likelihood of them doing that comes down significantly. If you were to put a physical barrier system, we're talking about exposure. If you were to separate it by a really long way, so a completely separated off-road cycle facility would be an exposure. So that's that one. We've got a few others, one on intersection, how to score intersections and the like. So you notice these are what we call safe system assessment scoring fact sheets. We haven't even got to scoring, but essentially what a safe system assessment does in a much more detailed process than you did was take that assignment you've just completed and then quantify it, put actual values on each of those things that you were talking about. So we'll get into that. But Kathy and Emma, I assume we've put those into Moodle, have we?
Yeah, absolutely. They're in the resources part in Moodle.
Good. So they're worth having.
Actually, I think maybe even there was a hard copy. Somebody can confirm. I think that was so good that we even printed them.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
Confirmed. Thank you.
Rightio. Well, that's been a really good lead up. I love a bit of interaction. I love a bit of live looking at sites on these courses. And yeah, so this module, we want to talk about movement and place, or that sort of strategic planning perspective of a road network and how that links with safe system thinking. And then we want to identify characteristics for vulnerable road users, so pedestrian, cycle, and motorcyclists that align highly with safe system principles, and thus what doesn't align highly with safe system principles. And then categorize some risk factors for vulnerable road users into that exposure, likelihood, and severity. So once we've done this, we really are into the actual mechanics of doing assessments. And then the next module, we're going to give you the mechanics, how you actually quantify things, how you write it up. And then we're going to send you out to do your safe system assessment. So, but we do need to ensure that we're appropriately assessing our vulnerable road users as well, pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists. Now, I'm going to talk about movement and place. It may be called something slightly different in your area, but it's called link and place in some areas, movement and place. But it's basically your methodology for categorizing bits of road into their function, accounting that they can be movement corridors, or that they could be places, or they could be a combination of both a movement corridor and a place, an area for trade, interaction, vibrancy, and those sorts of things. Now, I just grabbed one of the many movement and place diagrams that are available. So you could use any. I just happened to grab the Sydney one, which I had been doing some work with, which they've updated and moved on to other things. But I still think this one sort of shows the movement and place philosophy in quite a clear and easy matter to follow. And so it's basically saying that any section of road is going to have a movement function and a place function, but those are very scalable. Now your classic that really actually doesn't have any place function or shouldn't have any place function is your motorway. And so on the y-axis, we've got movement, and on the x-axis, we've got place. Now, as I mentioned there, place is this thing that we talk about for areas that are vibrant, have trade, have interaction between humans, social activity, and they're in the movement and place manuals and the like that you can find many of if you just Google movement and place. They'll give you some refined definitions of place. But if we go back here and we see that motorways are really just a movement corridor, that isn't what they're all about, moving people and goods. You could put in here, an absolute dedicated cycleway with nothing else. It's just as much a movement corridor as a motorway, in the sense that movement is not just about cars or trucks. It's about movement of people and goods in whatever mode that they are moving. But the idea is that they're trying to get through there as fast as they possibly can. Right at the other extreme, where we've got an area that's all about place, is like a shopping mall, like a mall. It's a road that used to probably have traffic going through it back in the day, but now it's really been closed off, and it's just pedestrian, cyclist, but lots of interaction. Now you can see this one sort of even still retains a little bit of movement corridor potentially, tiny bit. And then we've got these other categorizations. And what we see down here is that we're areas with low place value and fairly low movement are our sort of local streets. Now, you don't tell the residents of the local street that we categorize them as low place value. They don't like to hear that their street is low value. But at a whole society level, at a community level, it is low place value, because the place is about trade, economic activity, and interaction, and all those things, and there's not a huge amount of that going on. People like to try to increase the place value of their areas, but anyway, that's it. Then we've got movement corridors up here, so it's more about movement of people and goods, and usually these, or a lot of these, are big traffic arterial style roads. Over here we have vibrant, a category they call vibrant streets, and this is the one where it's trying to move people through and goods through as quickly as possible, but it's also generated place activity. And these are often your high streets, and they've sort of, they've originally started as a movement corridor, and then place has built around them because of the number of customers, and it's just that's how your network has evolved. These are, I find, the hardest to deal with. They're not the hardest to assess, because the assessment is actually just the assessment. You just look at it, you assess it based on exposure, likelihood, severity. They're the hardest to address, to come up with meaningful recommendations to get us better aligned with the safe system principles. What I often do with the strategic planners, and when I'm doing a safe system assessment, we get the safe system assessment team together, and we get the project team together, and we get the strategic planners in the room. We talk about the function of that road into the future. We say, come on, let's get it out of this category. Tell us, what is it? Is it going to go into there, or is it going to go down to here? What do you want it to do? They get very uncomfortable, they're squirming, and they don't like to. Oh, very important, public transport corridor and cars. But can't do anything about the traders or anything like that. So they get very uncomfortable. And they're the hard category to deal with. But if you can get any indication of that change or that way they're trending to more a movement corridor or more a place, it's going to help you in your safe system assessment, because when you come to making recommendations or ideas that they could consider in changes or alterations, it's much easier. But I'll explain that with a few little diagrams. But we'll give you a little exercise to do shortly. So places are, as I said, areas where you're really not expecting large movement of vehicles through. There's a temporary place in Sydney there, but so what I want to do is just a little exercise, and you're going to get your typing fingers out ready to go. And I'm just going to show you an area that we've pre-categorized. So we said our future aspiration is to have this as a really good place for people. Okay? Place function is our key. Movement, it's not we're not sort of aspiring to make this a major movement corridor. And what I want you to do is tell me what we could alter in the sketch that I've got to make it better aligned with safe system principles, acknowledging that our aspiration is for place. Okay. So here's the artistic impression, and they're always factually inaccurate, aren't they, when you get the artists onto it, but don't worry about that. But we're seeing here that it's a road, it's got cars, pedestrians, cyclists, it's 40 km/h speed zone. It's got lighting and sidewalks and the like. We've recognized our aspiration is to have this as a place, and we want you to suggest things we can do to improve alignment with safe system principles and also get us that place value. When you do it though, when you type something in, which I'll ask you to do in a second, I also want you to put in brackets or just the dash after it, whether what you're proposing influences exposure, likelihood, or severity, or a combination of them. So if you were to say, I don't know, ban heavy vehicles, right? You would put ban heavy vehicles dash severity, because the crashes are going to be less severe with the lighter vehicles. Or maybe you'd put severity and a little bit of exposure, because there'd be a few less vehicles. But you come up with whatever you want, and I'm going to give you a few minutes to do this. Put in a few ideas, and then we will have a chat about it. Type in any questions you have if you're confused with the task here. But remember to put in your exposure, likelihood, severity. All right. All right. I love this group. Kathy, Emma, this is, they're awesome. I want to do like an Oprah thing. Everybody gets a prize, but I won't. We'll give out a few prizes as we go. Okay, let's just run through a few of them and we'll have a bit of a chat about some of the things. So we've got the idea of, and I like that it was sort of the first thing that came up, was remove vehicles, remove cars from this road. And the fact that we said it was a aspiration to be a place, and that's absolutely the first thing you'd start with. Do we even need this road open to vehicles? And that's going to reduce the exposure to crashes, because those vehicles which are going to be creating the crashes are not going to be there. So great thing to start with. And then people saying, oh, well, maybe it does need to have a little bit of movement function through it. So what about we make it like a shared space and very low speed environment, which is going to help with the likelihood and the severity of crashes. That's right. Now, you might get sort of worked up trying to analyze, is that going to impact on the exposure as well? Because, we probably won't be able to get as many vehicles through there, and that might be part of it. But generally, lower speeds, we're talking about likelihood and severity. Neil's come up with a great one there. Wider footpaths being a likelihood factor, absolutely, and it's a really well categorized there, because the wider footpaths are, there's less likelihood that somebody has to walk on the road. Now, some people want to get into trying to categorize that into exposure, because when they cross the road, it'll be shorter crossing distance, those sort of things. Don't get caught up into that in exposure in the safe system assessment. Just keep that for your likelihood. So some separated cycle lanes for potentially, some people saying exposure. I'd probably get more likelihood on those, depending on how you separated them. So go to that fact sheet I told you about, just to get a bit more clarity around that. So then some people started talking about making this a one-way system. And that's an interesting one to analyze under a safe system assessment. And people have put everything in there, as in categorize that in exposure, in severity, and in likelihood. Now, the exposure would really be to predict your traffic volumes. Now, if you were creating a circular system of one ways, you're probably going to have the same traffic volume, as in moving some other volume to that one. So that maybe wouldn't change your exposure. You'd have some, if you wanted, you could get some traffic modeling done or make a prediction on that. The severity will be all about really what speeds are you going to be traveling through there in your one-way system, but also a little bit about the crash types and the angles that might happen. So for pedestrians and cyclists, it's probably the angle really isn't as influential. So you wouldn't get actually an alteration in severity unless the speed came down as well. For vehicle-to-vehicle crashes, we might see an improvement in angle of crash with a one-way system a little bit. But the likelihood's probably the one that is going to get the most benefit from a one-way system, because it's far easier to predict where the vehicles are coming from, and so pedestrians are more aware of where vehicles are coming from, cyclists are more aware, and it's a less complicated system, so it's a less likelihood. We've got some people looking at removing parking, and now this is always an interesting one. So removing parking opens up sight lines, stops, pedestrians. Little pedestrians often be hidden behind cars. Okay, so you get this likelihood benefit, but often it comes with a wider carriageway and increased speeds, which increases the severity of crashes and a little bit takes back what you gain from the likelihood. So if you are ever going to remove parking, you want to complement that with other features that narrow the road, such as curb outstands or the like, in order to keep that slow speed, or local area traffic management for that matter, keep the slow speeds and do that. Works beautifully with some other ideas there on these big, wider footpaths. So narrowing down the road, removing parking, much more space for trade, for interaction, for street dining, for all of those sorts of things, which we know increase the place value, and they get better aligned with safe system principles. Then we did have a few people in there narrowing the road, putting in raised areas, putting in lower speed limits, all of which are changing the likelihood and severity of crashes. Absolutely. Lots of people coming up with similar ideas, which is great, and they're very good ideas too. Just see if I can find anything slightly different. So limiting commercial vehicle use to particular times, which are outside of the primary pedestrian activity, can influence the severity, exposure, and likelihood, is what this person has put down. And that's generally right. Again, you'd want to get some numbers with that if you're actually assessing it to determine whether that's actually changing the exposure to crashes. Because if you just change the volumes to a different time, we tend to, in a broad brush categorization within safe system assessment, still say it's got the same exposure. The likelihood, potentially, if you believe that lessens, the chance that these crashes will happen, and the severity possibly as well. So a little bit more analysis of how that all plays out required. Install bollards through the centre with the bollards forming a wave pattern to slow traffic further and define where vehicles can go. I like it. Getting into some innovative style treatments, but the principle is really good because we create these straight roads. What like people call them stroads. Stroads are they're very much a traffic vehicle, car, truck facility, and the straight nature of them induces high speeds. And so the idea that if you could have it more as a meandering street that's narrower, and we would see more of a place and a livable area, lower speeds, and better alignment with safe system principles. So that's a good one. Yeah, so that's about all I'll get to. But gee, that was some really great stuff that came in there from everybody. A little bit of a sort of artistic impression of it, altered here. Again, this is just an artist's go at it, but sort of seeing those big those big footpaths, thus narrowing the road, seeing much lower speeds, so that 10 kilometre per hour, if it was open to traffic at all. We're seeing, they're the main sort of things that really give us that benefit. All this stuff will reduce the likelihood of crashes. You want to see the traffic volumes to get an idea of how that influences the exposure to crashes, and the lower speed will be the severity of crashes. But you can immediately see, right, that's a more livable area, isn't it? It's more of a place to be, place you want to be than that as a pedestrian or the like. So questions come in, do we need to consider type of users? Yeah, well, you do. You factor all of that in. So when you're doing your movement in place, if it's a movement corridor, you will definitely consider, well, what type of users are moving through there? Is it a cyclist movement corridor? Is it a car movement corridor? Is it a public transport movement corridor? And if it's a place, yeah, you'd be considering, how is it a place? Is it a place because it's got parks and kids and the like, or is it a place because it's got street dining and bars and nightclubs and is it that type of place? And then how does that sort of play out? Interesting little other subtlety on this one. Now, I don't know. I mean, in a safe system assessment, you get asked these broad categorizing or these broad questions about other elements of the safe system. So the road users, the vehicles themselves and their safety features, the ability to enforce and maintain. But I do notice in this artistic impression, we see a bike rider there not wearing a helmet, but then these ones are wearing helmets, which is quite interesting. So a little bit of road user stuff as well.
If you increase the attractiveness to cyclists to use the place, does that increase the exposure for pedestrians potentially?
So if you sort of predict a latent demand, being the old, like latent demand is really if you build it, they will come. You build a really nice cycling facility and you'll get more cyclists. The way you assess that in a safe system assessment is to make your prediction on what is going to happen. If you get traffic modelling or some people with some predictive models on volumes of cyclists or the like through an area, or pedestrians through an area, you can utilise that from sort of generally day one. The question there about, will it increase exposure to pedestrian crashes potentially? I'm wondering if that's sort of the cyclist versus pedestrian type crash that you're talking about. And there is, there's a possibility there that you would have to account for that in the scoring of your safe system assessment. But I dare say it'll be a fairly low score compared to the score you would be allocating for car to pedestrian crashes. What else are we seeing there? I expect areas adjacent to schools have greater likelihood uncontrolled crossing use, random crossing. So yeah, schools generally have a higher likelihood around schools of crashes due to kids being kids and darting out and the like around the road. So we factor that into the likelihood of crashes, and there's lots of things we can do to decrease the likelihood of crashes. I was sort of dusting off a risk model that I had prepared for risk of crashes around schools, where you can plug in the variables of around the road in front of the school or around the school, and it spits out a risk score, which was fun because it reminded me of some research that showed that if it's an all boys school, it nearly doubles the risk of pedestrian crashes, as in school kids being struck, which I think says a bit. I sort of debated how I would put that into the risk model or not, or whether it's appropriate to run public policy, as in we're going to invest in a school crossing outside this school or a lower speed limit or infrastructure because it's an all boys school, and then we know that their risk is higher, which I think, in the end, it's their risk is higher. Anyway, that's an aside. I'm on a tangent. Okay. If you decided and you talked to the strategic planners about this area, and they said that No, there's actually, we have a bit more movement function that you're suggesting here. There's important movement here, especially public transport through the area and the like. You can still have these sort of places that have a bit more movement function through them, but they're still, you can see, quite sort of well set up as a place. So again, we're going these wider footpaths, but you're starting to introduce the more dedicated movement corridors of the cycle facility there, and the bus facility, which is also sort of doubles as a road. But you can see that still that's much much more of a place feel, and you're getting sort of, this is where you're now pushing just to the limits of what we would categorize in that place for people category. We go to local streets. We know, as I said there, that local streets we generally categorize as low place value and low movement corridor. They're not trying to provide major movement through these areas, from one end to another. They're not this highly vibrant trade area. Certainly people live there and they catch up with each other and the like. But when you get yourselves into these sorts of ones where they're balanced like that, you really have to prioritize the safety of the most vulnerable. So this is where we're talking pedestrians and cyclists. So we do want to start to see these with features to lower the speed of vehicles through there. So your raised crossing points, or your local area traffic management, your speed cushions, raised areas, chicanes, mini roundabouts, these sorts of things. And thanks to Ian for sending through those mini roundabout pictures. They were fantastic. So we won't do this one as a group exercise. I'll do one of the ones we come up to a little bit later. But these areas sort of similar to the others, but when you're starting to identify now that they don't have as much place value, but you're still creating that movement corridor. You've got a bit higher speed, you've got a bit wider road, but it's a sort of very similar environment to try to protect the most vulnerable. Vibrant streets. We said this is a really, really challenging one to deal with. This is where we're talking about that corridor that has a high movement, high place categorization, the ones where the strategic planners get really uncomfortable, as you interrogate them on what the future of this road is. Let's have a chat about this one. So this one in its current form really does look like sort of what I would call a traffic sewer. It's really just pumping cars and the like through this area. But the aspiration for it is to be more place orientated. So it's actually taking it more from that traffic function to the place due to the pedestrian activity and trade and things that is happening in the area. So let's do that again. We see this one's got a 70 km/h speed limit. We've got pedestrian cyclists. It's got a pedestrian overpass at the moment, but it's been categorized within the vibrant streets category, meaning it does have high place, but it's also going to maintain high movement. So this is one where the strategic planners are like, yeah, we want to make them more a place. Oh, but we don't want to lose the movement function. Okay, all right. So let's have a chat about, same exercise, pop in their ideas you've got for alterations that will improve alignment with safe system principles, better its place value, but maintain its movement function, or keep that movement function, and also then put in exposure likelihood and or severity.
Should we go about 3 or 4 minutes for this one, Ken, and then everyone can have a little drink break as well?
Yeah, all right, good idea. Let's go with 4 minutes. So type a few things in, have a stretch, fill up your coffee or a water, and we'll be back in 4 minutes. Yeah, Kathy, I don't know if you stopped the recording at all, but if you did, let's start it up again.
I did, and I did start it up again. Woohoo! Make sure you let me know who gets a prize in this one, if you're giving away some prizes, if you're doing an Oprah.
Yes. Okay, I better give away a couple of prizes, eh? It's hard though, because so many prizes could be given away. Right. Got to see where we ended the other one and we start this new one. Okay, here we go. All right, so we've got this road and we're saying it's got high movement function and high place function. And how do we alter it and get better alignment with safe system principles? We're also maintaining this. So there's some people talking about reducing the speed limit through the area, separating cycle lanes, and this all really predominantly influencing the likelihood, possibly the severity by the speed limit reduction as well. And I think that's a very good answer. So we'll give Jason a prize straight off the back. He was one of the first to get something in there. So we're seeing some more support for these lower speed limits through there, and I think that's quite sort of forward thinking in the sense that people often are reluctant to go lower speeds when it's got that movement corridor. But the thing is that works if it's a genuine movement corridor, and you're actively trying to stop the vulnerable road users in the area. But if it's got that place function as well, the end result is the speeds are going to have to come down, because you can't sort of have that interaction, that trade, that movement of vulnerable road users while maintaining that high speed. So we've got dedicated bus and cycle lanes, and reducing the speed to 40. So put down to exposure there, and yeah, that's a bit more sort of understanding of exactly what you had in mind there in terms of how you're getting that to exposure compared to likelihood as well, because there may still be the likelihood of crash. There may still be sort of the chance that those crashes happen. They're just reduced in likelihood. So a bit more clarity around that helps when you're assessing. Lower speed, severity, completely separated cycle, car, bus lanes, wider footpaths, likelihood, loading, unloading zones and time frames, stop pedestrians walking into the traffic lanes, exposure. So that's another good one. Interesting one to stop pedestrians walking into the traffic lanes as exposure. That can often challenge your place functioning of the road. So if you physically start to try to stop pedestrians moving and permeating through an area, it immediately starts lending itself to a movement corridor, and you lose your place value. So in this one where we're trying to sort of maintain all of the above, it's a very challenging scenario, as I say, but you'd really need to think about trying not to actually corral and stop pedestrians with big pedestrian fencing or the like. So reduce speed limit, reduces likelihood and severity, reduce number of vehicle lanes and replace with wider footpaths, make dedicated express lanes, have medians between vehicle lanes with raised crossings. Most will reduce likelihood and severity. Exposure reduces if there is a drop in AADT. Spot on. Okay, so prize for Ian, prize coming Ian's way there. And the reason I sort of like that is that, especially like that, is that he said, well, exposure will depend on the AADT or the number of pedestrians crossing, number of cyclists crossing, and the like. So that's a very enlightened one there. Let's keep going here. We've got remove service roads and widen footpath as a likelihood factor. And again, I'm going to give a prize there. That one, who said that? Neil, can have a prize for that one, because that's another reminder that sort of narrowing there is really a likelihood factor until we're given that specific traffic volume impact, which could then alter the exposure. Ian's popped in there a little comment that congestion will often reduce actual travel speed. And funnily enough, I had a chief executive once who we were, he was doing some media, and we were sort of standing around. We briefed him up on the media. I can't even actually remember what it was about, but it certainly wasn't about congestion. It was about some road safety topic. Oh no, it was about speed limits, sorry. It was the new speed zoning guideline for Victoria that we're releasing. And the media, one of the questions came in to the chief executive, said something like, oh, you're reducing all that, there's going to be speed limit reductions all over the place. Congestion is rife in Melbourne, people, so what are you going to do to fix congestion and the like? And anyway, within the comment back to the chief executive, he said, well, congestion is road safety's friend. And we're all like, oh God. Yeah, so that was a nice quote in the paper from our chief executive, which he wasn't wrong. So, when you're absolutely, your road stuffed, congestion-wise, it's relatively safe due to the low speeds. It's probably not the way we want to achieve our road safety ambitions, but yeah. Anyway, lots of great stuff there. I can't get through it all. Do remember, though, that if you are have identified in your movement of place categorization that it is still, or it has high place value, really things like barriers, even things like overpasses and the like, are not, aligning that well with that aspiration. They do, you can get great safe system alignment with these features, but it really erodes your place categorization, because what you're essentially starting to move towards is more an urban motorway where you're blocking off pedestrians, you block off. And while that's a generally well-aligned safe system outcome, it's not a place. So here's the sort of artistic impression of something that still maintains high movement function, and high movement function being cyclists, pedestrians moving through the area as fast as possible, public transport and vehicles. Also has quite high place function there as well. Notice crossing points are slowed down with raised platforms. We do have that separation. So there's quite, you can see it's quite a nice space. Very big, wide road corridor, isn't it? But it was big and wide back here as well. It's just you can immediately see the more place value of it. Now, I see this through these very, road safe system glasses. Others might see it through other glasses, like encouraging active transport, the vegetation, the aesthetics, the trade, and so the thing is, we can get wins all across the board, and really probably the only people losing out of this are a small few car drivers who get an added few seconds on their journey potentially. Maybe a bit more congestion, but that's maybe where we're moving. Yeah, so there's some pretty low speed limits there. The ones on the bottom there say it's 40, but as I think somebody's pointing out with absolute eagle eyes, they're looking at some speed zones there. I think they have different ones for the central and the outer sort of semi-service road areas. Artistic impressions, though, remember. But it's good to see some of your areas sort of starting to move down these directions in your inner city. I think this is Christchurch. It must be Christchurch when I was there last time, which seems like an eternity ago these days. But starting to move towards these sorts of environments where you're still able to maintain that movement function of all road users, but you're starting to get more and more of a place feel. You often then find you're trying to deal with intersections and they're challenging, and you want to move cyclists around. Protected intersections are becoming all the rage these days, with dedicated cycle facilities through the intersections, and recognizing that pumping cars through as much as possible, as fast as possible, is only one small portion of the movement function of these areas. When you get into movement corridors, you do have to remember that it's movement of all road users. But if it is sort of movement and it's been identified that it's vehicle movement, cars, is what that function of that road is, and sure, we'll have some roads that have that absolute function. It does become the areas where you really are restricting access for vulnerable road users, so pedestrians. You don't want them crossing, you don't want them permeating, you don't want them congregating. And cyclists, again, if it's identified as a movement corridor for cyclists as well, you might be taking areas to provide dedicated cycle facilities. Or if it's not identified as a movement corridor for cyclists because there's a parallel cycle route or something like that, then you can actively be looking to restrict cyclists, ban cyclists even, as you would a motorway, but start to move down those tracks. Even on these movement corridors, we need to be thinking about safe system alignment and the energy transfer at different conflict points. So still need to be thinking about raised intersections if we've got, or slowing vehicles at intersections, however you want to do that, if you've got those right angles to that sort of 50 kilometre per hour. So cyclists and pedestrians are our most vulnerable. We're talking severe injury around the 20 to 30 kilometre per hour mark, and death is almost a certainty at a direct strike around 50 kilometres per hour. And obviously the young and the old even more vulnerable. So ideally we're managing speeds around that 20 to 30 kilometre per hour mark if possible, where pedestrian volume is significant. Otherwise, we want to separate from vehicles. Now remember to count your wallies, because that'll be a quiz question. So we talk about separated treatments, and please do just have a look at that fact sheet to understand when you would start deciding to change this from a likelihood to an exposure change. When we have roundabouts, we know that they do a really good job in reducing the severity of vehicle-to-vehicle crashes. We have some challenges often with pedestrians and cyclists, as we mentioned at other times. I think sort of people do get drawn to removing roundabouts often when their pedestrian or cyclist activity increases, or their aspiration is to do that, rather than looking at, can we still retain that value of the roundabout with providing the features. So there's a mock-up of the Moray Street protected roundabout, which can send you lots of info and intel on that. In fact, if you have a look at some of our safe system snippets, we've got stuff on that one. And we know then that the pedestrian crossing facility and the cyclist dedicated facilities and the raised areas reduce the likelihood and severity of crashes. So we get a really sort of wonderful safe system outcome. People are playing around with mock-ups for larger roundabouts with similar facilities and providing those dedicated crossing points around these for pedestrians or cyclists. And so what we'd see in something like this, we've got sort of a cyclist comes across here and can go through, and that provides some good separation, good facilities. And if the cyclist wanted to turn right, the idea is that they'd go across here, over here, come to this point, have a nice staged crossing across there, and then back out onto the road. Now, so what we're sort of seeing is likelihood and severity reduced here. This really, though, is all just about predominantly likelihood reduced. Maybe if the roundabout wasn't there, we might get severity reduction because the vehicles entering here are going to slow, but you still got a conflict point there of reasonable speed of severity for cyclists and pedestrians. So it's not, it's not our perfectly aligned safe system, but it's sort of this one that steps us in when you've got these two-lane roundabouts, and they're really often hard for your cyclist activity. Little diagram, which is sort of an adaptation of a Netherlands diagram, which sort of says that 0 to 30 is the shared lane sharing possibility. Prize for the person who can tell me the name for that symbol. First one to name that symbol. Now, as I say that, I'm going, I wonder if they use this in New Zealand. And it looks like they do, because Matt's got it in there. Oh, look at them all come in. Sharrow, 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 Sharrow. Correct, everybody. So Matt was in there first, and Ruben was so quick after that. Ruben can have a prize as well. Emma, if you're keeping track there, Matt and Ruben, both prizes for that. Yeah, Sharrow. It's a mash of the two words shared and arrow, which I used to think when I first heard Sharrow that it was chevron and arrow. Chevron was in there somehow, but it's just shared arrow. But it's to indicate the area of the road where it is that lane sharing. And we can sort of accommodate that up to maybe 30 kilometres an hour in terms of pure sort of safe system thinking. But, if you're trying to encourage 8-year-olds to be using the bike around the public network, it's probably a big ask to have an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old trying to claim lanes over a truck and the like. So have a think about it in that context as well. But from your sort of safe system perspective, it's generally around that. Anything in that 30 to 70 range, we want some physical separation, be that a physical separator or utilising the parking as a separator and the like. And then when we're up in these, 70 to 100, it's a full, large separation. I mean, that's not scale, but it's completely off-road facility. Pedestrians. I'll briefly talk about pedestrians, but I'll maybe just pause, see if there's any questions that have come in at this stage.
I just had a comment about experienced cyclists. They would rather own the lane in a roundabout rather than be on a separated path.
It's a really good point, because we talk about cyclists, or accurately, we talk about people who ride bikes, which is now the term we're meant to be using rather than cyclists, because you've got to try to remind people that it's the people we're interested in. People who ride bikes come in all shapes and forms and sizes, and we have young, we have your commuter cyclists, we have your lycra-clad cyclists, the mammals, as they're called, the middle-aged men in lycra. I probably categorize myself as a mammal these days when I get out on the on a training ride or the like. And you're right, you got to think about who's using that road, how much, what are we trying to encourage? Are we providing facilities which are catering for the bulk of the road users? And certainly we did a evaluation of the Moray Street Protected Roundabout. We discovered we sort of got 80% of cyclists, I think it was 75 or 80% of cyclists utilising these outer facilities. And that's because the majority were commuter cyclists and not your mammals doing their training run. But the more confident cyclists would they wouldn't go out to that. They'd just take the lane and run around through it. So it is a challenging scenario. But I think we've got to try to provide those facilities where we possibly can to have that option, but not ignore the other ones as well.
And Ken, can you tell us your thoughts about combined cycle bus lanes?
Yeah, it's probably an area that I'm not super well researched up on. So I can't make too many definitive comments about that. Motorcyclists in bus lanes I'm much better at, but cyclists in bus lanes, yeah. But if you sort of think about it from this safe system assessment perspective, you'd be balancing off a few different things. You'd be thinking about the likelihood of crashes being slightly lower in the sense that you're not mixing with cars in the bus lane. So you've got some advantages there. You may have some challenges around the intersections where the cars do go into the bus lanes, and are they less sort of aware of cyclists? But that's probably no different to a bike lane. So you're probably getting similar benefit there. You've got the fact that the bus drivers are, generally quite alert to these sorts of things, but you'd be thinking about then the challenges of buses getting around cyclists and any increase in likelihood of other crashes that may result in that. You've got, obviously all the vehicles turning in front, and then you've got the scenarios, albeit low likelihood, that if a bus hits a bike, the severity of that is going to be very likely quite high due to the weight of the bus and possible overrun and those sorts of things. But that's just sort of looking at it from breaking it down the way you'd break a safe system assessment down. Not that I know of particular research or trials or the like associated with that. I dare say that Transport for London, actually I better not say that because I'm not 100% sure. They certainly did quite a bit on motorcycles in bus lanes, and I'm having a feeling they did cyclists in bus lanes as well, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So apologies, I don't have really good answers for that. Good question though. Give a prize for that person who asked a good question.
You're really doing an Oprah today. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, John, for the question.
Okay, let's just briefly talk about pedestrians. So we're talking sort of more about cyclists back there, but this is a very sort of quick one for me where I'd say that we know pedestrian crossings, like zebra crossings, pedestrian crossings are, people often will say that will reduce the likelihood of crashes, as in an at-grade one. This is a raised one. This is what I would call a wombat crossing, but I don't think that's the name of it in New Zealand. I think it's just called a raised pedestrian crossing. But like a wombat crossing will reduce the likelihood and severity of crashes. But an at-grade crossing, like just a normal zebra crossing without the raised, we actually know in a lot of situations it increases the likelihood of crashes. The severity is high. The vehicles don't have physical treatments which will slow them on the approach, and pedestrians are now less alert, less looking around because they've got the priority. So be careful with your pedestrian crossings to ensure that the road environment around it is slow and conducive of good compliance, and if events happen, that they are low severity. Yeah, but in general, I would say that, you know, anywhere you've got the volume of pedestrians to warrant a pedestrian crossing, a zebra crossing, you've got the volume of pedestrians to make it raised. So if you go, well, hang on, if it's a bus route or something like that, well, I still think that you're perfectly able to do that. And we've certainly got lots and lots of evidence of being able to run buses over raised things. That's not an issue. But nonetheless, if you are particularly worried about that, you could look at things like speed calming on the approach, such as a speed cushion, which I think we all know what a speed cushion is. I don't need to draw it there. But so the bus can straddle it, whereas the vehicles slow down and things like that. But you really do need to look at that severity aspect of it. Other advantages and improvements in likelihood of crashes are the elevation of pedestrians into better eye line, better, they're up high, they're easier to see. And another one, which is really not a particular safe system thing, but it's just a probably nice thing, is that the pedestrians don't have to drop down and then come back up, and it's a smooth crossing point there. I suppose the interesting one here for me has always been that we know what safe system is for pedestrians, or what really well-aligned safe system is for pedestrians, and we've known for a long, long time. And in fact, if I ever have to give an elevator pitch on safe system, right, I often use this one. I say, you know much about workplace health and safety or the safety of road workers? And they say, oh yeah, no, generally a bit about it. I say, yeah, afford that level of safety to the whole travelling public, and we're pretty close. We're far better aligned with safe system principles. And this one, I think, highlights it particularly well. This is in Adelaide, and this is a sort of work area where there was a couple of workers doing electrical work down in the island here. That's got a slip lane there, and they're out there for a week and a bit. And so the protection was barriers, a speed limit reduction to 25 kilometres an hour, because that's the work zone speed limit in South Australia. Most areas use a 40, but anyway, so speed limit reduction, barriers, separation there. They do their work, they finish their work, and then they remove all the barriers, and the speed limit went back up to 60 kilometres an hour back in this day. And there's about 3,000 pedestrians a day that stand in that island, just doing their crossing. And, those there, some of them are intoxicated, some of them are not looking around at all because they're on their phone and looking at their phone or listening to AirPods or whatever. And so the thing is that we've said, it's unacceptable for a vulnerable road user to be here if they're a worker. But for a vulnerable road user to be there the rest of the day, well, it's on them to make sure they're safe. Well, this is where we can start to evolve and think that, well, it's actually our responsibility to ensure that the community is safe. And people might argue, well, the workers are not concentrating on the traffic and the like. But as I say, a lot of those road users aren't concentrating on the traffic either. And if you just say, well, they should, we're just ignoring the problem, really, aren't we? Because it's being human to be distracted, be interested in these other things. So I just think it's a vivid example. I think we know what's there. Lots of great stuff out there, though. Raised intersection, raised crossing points to slow vehicles and improve the likelihood and the severity aspects there. Raised thresholds, again, the crossing point there, slowing vehicles on the turn. Even just regulatory speed limit reductions. Again, this one's from Adelaide, and it, I won't no prizes for the year in which they did the change from a default 60 km/h speed limit to a 50, but you can see the step change there. So just that speed limit does really work quite well. I'll pause there before I get on to motorcyclists. What do we got? Only about 15 minutes to go. Okay, I better hurry up.
Thank you, Ken. Would you encourage courtesy pedestrian crossings?
I might need a bit of an explanation on what they mean by courtesy pedestrian crossing.
Okay.
It might be a little bit of a slightly different term to what I am used to. So just explain.
Yeah, no worries. We'll give not non-mandatory for the vehicle to stop.
Right. Yeah, so like if you are trying to encourage pedestrians to cross at a certain point because you've assessed it as lower risk, as in got good sight lines or something like that at that point, you're reducing the likelihood of crashes a bit. You're not doing anything for the severity of crashes in a lot of those cases, but you can get some safety benefit out of that because of that, as I say, reducing the likelihood of crashes. If you start to get into those funny situations where you're almost doing everything to make it look like a pedestrian crossing, but like a priority pedestrian crossing, but not doing it. So, doing surface changes, even raising it, and, making it really look like that. I get a little bit worried about confusion of priority, where a driver may not, a driver will be approaching and they don't legally have to stop, and they may be in that mindset, but a pedestrian might get fooled into thinking it's a crossing point and step out there at that location. So just be a little bit wary of that sort of stuff. But if you do raise these areas, you're going to get wonderful benefits in the reduction in severity anyway in your safe system assessment. Okay, let's talk about motorcyclists. I like to think about the 5 S's for motorcycle safety: sight, surface, signs, strike, and speed. And certainly we run a course called Making Roads Motorcycle Friendly, where we go into this all in much more detail over a day and do get you out on motorbikes in a closed environment just to get a feel for the challenges motorcyclists have. But I'll just touch on these very briefly in the sort of safe system assessment context. And we really see these ones. We've got the sight, the surface, the signs are likelihood factors. The strike, so when motorcyclists are hitting things or things are hitting motorcyclists, that's the severity. And the speed is both the likelihood and severity, because it's the magic thing in road safety. Less chance of crashes happening and less severe when they do. The injury curves of motorcyclists, so a colleague of mine, Johan Strandroth, has over in Sweden just with a bunch of colleagues just released their in-depth investigation and crash curves for motorcyclists, which is something that the world had been lacking, because we just said, oh, well, we'll just make them the same as a pedestrian or a cyclist because we don't really have any other things to do. But you can see there's slightly altered curves for a Maze 3 plus F, so that's a high-level serious injury plus fatality, and you can see some slightly different curves. They're actually elongated from what we generally thought, and you can get a little bit higher speeds with some motorcycles. But they're in your notes in case you want to get into that in detail. If you're interested in the actual research report, we could send a copy to that as well for anybody who's interested. But let's look at a few. Sight. Okay, well, motorcyclists are smaller. They're hidden behind objects much more. So you can see the motorcyclist just hidden behind the tree there. Harder to see, easier hidden. And motorcyclists also the sight lines that they need around curves and those sorts of things are quite important. And those are influencing the likelihood of crashes. The surface itself influences the likelihood of crashes also. We certainly know that motorcyclists lean. They have the two small contact patches on the road. And the surface becomes a highly important aspect of the likelihood of crashes for motorcyclists. We call motorcyclists the canary in the coal mine for road maintenance. They're the first ones to be killed or seriously injured when things are bad or start to get bad. And these just simply the center of gravity and the two small contact patches mean that they come off quite easily. Things like anything slippery on the road surface, be it large steel plates, big thermoplastic line marking patches, any surface deficiencies, bleeding, flushing, rutting, potholes, you name it, it's all going to potentially destabilize a rider and increases the likelihood of the crash. And you got to think about riders also, following behind vehicles in the dark, bit of fog, on the visor and things. So while this looks very obvious now, but if they were following behind a truck in the wet or something like that, it could be a challenge. Signs. So the appropriate signage is actually quite an effective likelihood reducer for motorcyclists. Motorcyclists are quite aware of signage and respond to it quite well. So that is a good likelihood factor. And you can use these specific motorcycle warning signs to particularly enhance and talk to motorcyclists in particular about a hazard for the motorcyclist, like a slightly slippery surface or a gravel on the road. If it's continually being washed on the road, ideally just get rid of the gravel rather than putting a warning sign up. And strike. So this is always an interesting one where we try to protect road users from strike hazards by putting barriers up a lot of the time. And for motorcyclists, barriers can be a strike hazard in their own right, quite a severe strike hazard in their own right. So interesting stuff done here. I'll play a little video of some motorcycle crash testing. So this is the European crash test for motorcyclists, which is you get a dummy, a crash test dummy, and you modify it slightly, and then you slide it at the barrier, the post, at 60 kilometers per hour, 25-degree angle. And there you go. So that's what happens. And you can see that the force at 60 kilometers an hour, well, it easily kills the motorcyclist. But then if there's some sort of underrun protection, we get some cushioning using the barrier, and we then get that deflection of energy. And so the energy is washed off as that rider slides. You can see some absorption of energy by the barrier system, and then you can see that deflection. And so under the European crash test, our underrun protections perform really well, these sorts of features. And how am I going for time? Oh, yeah, I've got a little side story. This was crash testing out of Crash Lab, Transport for New South Wales, and they got the dummy, they changed it, they decided they'd start on the post test, so which where they fling the dummy at the post without the underrun protection, which was the first one I showed you. There you go. And that was, they wrote their dummy off. The dummy was a write-off. And those dummies cost them about $270,000. So they had to get another dummy and do their other test. Probably would have worked better if they'd done it the other way around. So the barrier itself may increase the likelihood and severity of crashes for motorcyclists, but if you're putting underrun protection, the likelihood's still high because they're going to hit the barrier. The severity comes down. Now, probably some of you are interested in wire rope safety barrier and motorcyclists. It's a big topic for discussion, but I'll summarize it in 20 seconds. Motorcyclists, so you don't use wire rope safety barrier systems on popular motorcycle routes, not necessarily because it's more dangerous to motorcyclists, but because you can't most of the time. If it's a windy touring route, so like, I don't know, the Coromandel or the like, you're not going to use wire rope because the radius of the curves is quite tight in a lot of situations. And I'm just going to draw this, my pen back. So if you're looking down on a road, you've got a curve radius like that. And if you put a wire rope barrier system in there, you've got your anchor there and your anchor there, and then you tension it up, what's going to happen? It's going to pop into the middle of the road. You don't do it. You use a flexible W-beam system with underrun protection. So you're not going to use it there. So that's one thing. We don't actually have good underrun protection devices for wire rope systems. So there's a little bit of sympathy with motorcycle groups who are very angry about wire rope systems. We're not using them in high risk locations for motorcycles anyway. They're used on long, straight motorways or big roads like that, where motorcyclists don't tend to fall asleep and drift off the road like a car does. So anyway, I've got, again, a mountain of literature and safe system snippets on these sorts of things. So happy to share as we go. Advisory speeds, speed reductions, likelihood and severity for motorcyclists through less chance of crash and lower impact if they do crash. Okay, so next week we're going to be next module, which is actually on, I think, Thursday. Maybe Kathy or Emma will tell me. We're going to be delving into this assessment framework, and you are now primed and ready to go because you know what exposure is, likelihood, severity. You're thinking about all road users. You've got categories in your mind, and you just need to be told how to score it and how to report it. Any questions or comments come through there, Kathy? I should say that I am a licensed motorcycle rider. So
with that moustache, I'd hope so.
Wear some leather as well. No, I'm a licensed motorcycle rider. I got my motorcycle license quite a while back when I was managing a big motorcycle safety infrastructure program to understand a little bit about the needs of motorcyclists, but I'm far too scared to ride a bike on the public road network these days. Okay, any questions or comments?
It doesn't look like it. Now's the time. We've got a couple minutes to go, so now is the time. Now we only just have a quiz only, just a quick multiple choice quiz to do at the end of this session. And if you haven't submitted your Module 2 assignment, Ken will have another marking binge later this week, so he will have a look at those if you can get those ones in.
Yeah, so yeah, do your quiz, finish off that assignment, shoot through an email or give us a call if you've got questions. If you want any more information on anything we touched on, recording will be in Moodle. Otherwise, I think we're pretty good. Have a good week. See you on.
I think so. Sorry, I've just quickly brought up, if you haven't already had a look at your Module 5 area, which is what Ken's going to cover off on Thursday, but that's the sites we've assigned you. So if you did want to do a bit of a change or a swapsies, or you can't quite get to your site, jump in there, find your name and have a look at what site you've been assigned, and just get in touch with me if it doesn't work for any particular reason.
Awesome. Log in early on Thursday for a chance to win a prize. More trivia. What are we going to go? Road related or foot related?
Hard to say, Ken. Well, foots are used by pedestrians. See?
Good link. All right. On that note, let's walk right out of here.
Perfect. Thank you. Bye, everyone.